The traffic stop that changed everything. The late afternoon sun bathed the streets in a warm golden hue as Cassandra Monroe navigated the open road. The air was crisp, the kind of spring day that made the world feel alive. But she barely noticed. Her thoughts were set on one thing: getting home. 7 months pregnant, she was exhausted. Long shifts at the precinct took their toll, and today had been no different. It wasn't just the paperwork, the briefings, or the endless meetings that drained her. It was the responsibility. As one of the few black women to rise to the rank of police captain in the city, she carried more than just a badge. She carried expectations, unspoken battles, and a constant need to prove herself. A sharp pain shot through her lower back, making her shift in her seat. She exhaled, rubbing a hand over her stomach. "Almost home, little one," she murmured to her unborn child. The streets were quiet, the highway mostly clear. Without realizing it, she pressed a little harder on the gas. It wasn't reckless, just a few miles over the limit. She knew better, but she wanted to get off the road as quickly as possible. Then she saw them, flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror, the sudden wail of a siren. Her heart gave a familiar, uneasy thud. She glanced at the speedometer. A few miles over. Not much, but enough. With a practiced motion, she flipped on her turn signal and eased her car onto the shoulder. She placed both hands on the wheel, taking a steadying breath. As a police officer, she had done this routine stop thousands of times. As a black woman, she had lived this moment in a different way, one where she wasn't the one in uniform. A sense of dread settled in her chest, even though she knew she had done nothing truly wrong. The driver's side mirror reflected a tall figure approaching. White, mid-40s. The crisp navy blue uniform fit snugly over his broad frame, and his posture was stiff. His face was unreadable, but there was something cold in his approach, something that sent a chill through Cassandra. The officer didn't greet her, didn't ask for the usual routine of, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Instead, he stopped just short of her window, squared his stance, and spoke in a clipped, authoritative voice. "License and registration." No ma'am. No polite request. No explanation. Cassandra kept her movements slow and deliberate as she reached for her glove compartment. "Of course, officer. May I ask why I was stopped?" "You were speeding," he snapped. She retrieved her documents and handed them over. His fingers barely grazed hers as he took them, but the brief contact sent a jolt through her. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper, an understanding. She had dealt with men like him before. Men who didn't see her as a person first. Men who saw only what they wanted to see. "Officer, I understand the speed limit, and I apologize," she said evenly. "I'm 7 months pregnant. I wasn't driving recklessly, just trying to get home because I wasn't feeling great." The officer's jaw tightened. His pale blue eyes flicked down to her belly for the first time, then back up to her face. "Pregnant or not, you broke the law," he said curtly. His tone was sharp, dismissive. Cassandra bit the inside of her cheek, willing herself to stay calm. "I understand that," she said. "If you need to issue a citation, I will comply. I respect the law, officer." She tilted her head slightly, reading the name on his badge. "Officer Daniels." Something flickered in his expression at the sound of his own name, but it wasn't recognition. It was annoyance. "You don't get to decide what happens next," he said. Cassandra exhaled slowly. She had trained officers for years on how to de-escalate situations, how to read body language, how to recognize when someone was pushing a situation unnecessarily. Right now, Daniels was pushing. A brief silence settled between them, thick and suffocating. Then, instead of moving back to his car to run her information, he lingered. His eyes studied her ID for a long moment. Too long. Her name. Her rank. But his expression didn't change. He didn't recognize her. Or worse, he did. And he didn't care. The air in the car suddenly felt heavier. Something told Cassandra that this wasn't just going to be a routine traffic stop. It was about to become something much worse. The situation escalates. Cassandra's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as Officer Daniels remained by her window, his expression unreadable. The air between them was charged, heavy with something unspoken. He had her ID. He had her registration. By all logic, he should have walked back to his cruiser, run her information, and either issued a warning or written a ticket. But he didn't move. Instead, he stared at her license, his brows furrowing slightly. Something was clicking into place in his mind. She waited for the moment recognition would flash across his face, the moment he'd realize exactly who she was, Captain Cassandra Monroe, one of the highest-ranking officers in the precinct, a veteran of the force, a woman who outranked him. But it didn't come. Or maybe it did, and he simply didn't care. His grip on her license tightened, the edge of the plastic pressing into his fingers. "You live in Westwood," he stated, his tone flat. Cassandra blinked. It wasn't a question, and it had nothing to do with the stop. "Yes," she said cautiously. His lip curled, just slightly. "That's a nice neighborhood." The implication hung in the air. Nice neighborhood. For someone like you. She had encountered this subtle kind of prejudice before, the kind that disguised itself in casual comments, in the way some officers lingered too long when she walked into a room, in the way people who weren't expecting a black woman in a high-ranking position hesitated before addressing her as captain. She kept her face neutral, refusing to give him any reaction. "It is." Daniels exhaled through his nose, and finally moved. But instead of returning to his car, he stepped back and placed a hand on the grip of his holstered weapon. "Step out of the vehicle." Cassandra's pulse spiked. "Excuse me?" I said, "Step out of the car." Her stomach tightened. She had done nothing to warrant being ordered out. A minor speeding infraction did not justify a search or an arrest. But Daniels wasn't following standard procedure. He was following his own rules. Her training told her to remain calm, to comply, to avoid escalating the situation. But she also knew her rights. "Officer," she said, keeping her tone measured, "with all due respect, I don't believe this stop requires me to exit my vehicle. I've given you my license and registration. If you're writing a citation, I will sign it and be on my way." Daniel's jaw flexed. His fingers twitched near his holster. "You seem nervous," he said. "Are you carrying anything illegal?" The accusation sent a wave of heat through her. "I am a police officer," she said firmly. Silence. For a brief second, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Doubt? Then, just as quickly, it was gone. "Step out," he repeated, his voice harsher now. Her hands trembled slightly, not out of fear for herself, but for the child growing inside her. Stress wasn't good for the baby. She needed to end this before it went further. She unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door, moving carefully. As she stood, she placed a protective hand over her belly, letting the swell of her pregnancy become even more visible. Daniel's gaze flickered downward. His nostrils flared slightly, but there was no sign of sympathy. He motioned to the side of the car, hands on the vehicle. A deep sense of anger boiled inside her, but she forced herself to remain composed. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice even. "I'm 7 months pregnant. What exactly are you searching for?" "That's not your concern." Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Her body ached. Her baby kicked, as if sensing the tension. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze directly. "If you put your hands on me without just cause, you'll regret it." The words weren't a threat. They were a promise. Daniel's eyes darkened. His pride had been wounded. "You don't give me orders," he hissed. Before she could respond, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. She sucked in a breath, her hand instinctively clutching her stomach. Daniel stepped back, eyes narrowing. What now? Cassandra inhaled deeply, trying to assess the pain. It wasn't constant, just a wave. A Braxton Hicks contraction, probably. Still, a cold realization settled in her gut. If the stress of this situation pushed her into labor, she could be in real danger. Daniels didn't move to help. He just stared, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I need to sit down," she said, shifting her weight uncomfortably. "You've made your point. Let's end this." But Daniels wasn't done. And as another police cruiser pulled up behind his, Cassandra realized this was far from over. A test of power. Cassandra's breath came in short, controlled inhales as she steadied herself against the car. Her belly was heavy, her back throbbed, and the sharp pain from moments ago still lingered like a warning. She needed to stay calm. Stress could trigger early labor, and the last thing she wanted was to give this officer any more power over her than he already felt he had. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the second police cruiser as it rolled to a stop behind his. The moment the door opened, Cassandra's stomach tightened, not from the pregnancy this time, but from sheer frustration. Out stepped another officer. Younger, stocky, and just as white as Daniels. His uniform was crisp, his gun holstered, but his expression was unreadable as he approached. His name tag read McAllister. Daniels turned toward him, nodding once. "We've got a situation," he said. Driver was speeding, acting suspicious, refused to step out at first. Cassandra clenched her jaw. That was a lie. She had never refused to get out. She had questioned the necessity, which was her right, and she sure as hell hadn't been acting suspicious. McAllister took a slow glance at her face, her belly, her uniform slacks that still had the faintest crease from earlier in the day. He hesitated. Then he looked back at Daniels. "She's pregnant," he said, as if his partner hadn't noticed. Daniels scoffed. "And?" McAllister scratched his jaw. Something about this didn't sit right with him. Cassandra could see it. He wasn't as sure of the situation as Daniels was, but he wasn't about to challenge his partner. Not yet. Cassandra took the opening. "Officer McAllister," she said, her voice level but firm. "I don't know what Daniels told you, but I was pulled over for a minor traffic violation. I complied. I gave my identification. I've done nothing wrong. And now, despite being 7 months pregnant, I'm being treated like a suspect instead of a citizen." McAllister's frown deepened. Daniels, on the other hand, stiffened. "You don't get to decide how this stop goes." Daniels snapped. "You're not in charge here." Oh, if only he knew. Cassandra exhaled slowly. Her back ached. Her baby shifted, pressing against her ribs. She had 100 different ways she could play this. She could pull rank. She could tell them who she was, demand respect, remind them that she had the power to make or break their careers. But she didn't want to weaponize her authority. She wanted them to do the right thing without her having to. "Are we seriously doing this?" she asked, leveling her gaze at Daniels. "For what?" "A few miles over the speed limit." Daniels smirked, shifting his weight. He was enjoying this, enjoying having her under his thumb. "You tell me," he said. "A lot of people have something to hide." Cassandra felt her fingers twitch. She was a police captain, the highest-ranking officer between the three of them. If she had been in uniform, Daniels would have been tripping over himself to show respect. But here, in this moment, she was just another black woman to him. That truth burned. McAllister shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should." Daniels cut him off with a sharp glare. A warning, a silent order to shut up and let him handle it. Cassandra saw the hesitation in McAllister's eyes. She saw the internal war. Do I back my partner, or do I step in? He was younger, newer to the force. She guessed he had a few years under his belt, but not enough to feel confident pushing back against an older officer. Not enough to challenge someone who had already made up his mind. She had seen it before. The moment where good cops had the chance to be better, but didn't. Cassandra felt another dull pain throb through her belly. She shifted, adjusting her stance. "I need to sit down," she said. "If you're not arresting me, Then we're done here. Daniel's lips twitched. Not quite, he said. I think we need to do a search. McAllister's head snapped toward him. For what? Daniels shrugged. Routine check. You never know. McAllister did know. He knew this wasn't routine. He knew there was no probable cause. Cassandra met his eyes, willing him to speak up. McAllister hesitated. Then, Cap. He stopped himself. Cassandra froze. He had almost said it. He had almost called her captain. McAllister recognized her. The realization hit him like a freight train. His face paled slightly, his mouth opening, then closing as if his brain was scrambling for the right course of action. Cassandra said nothing. She let him sit with it, let him process the fact that he was standing next to a superior officer. Daniels, oblivious, reached for the car door. Cassandra turned sharply. You do not have permission to search my vehicle. Daniels paused, his hand hovering over the door handle. He narrowed his eyes. What's your problem? He demanded. McAllister shifted uncomfortably again. Daniels, maybe we should. Shut up, McAllister, Daniels snapped. McAllister flinched, his lips pressing into a thin line. Cassandra took a deep breath. Enough was enough. She straightened her spine, squared her shoulders, and looked Daniels directly in the eye. Officer Daniels, she said, her voice calm, authoritative. You are seconds away from making the biggest mistake of your career. Daniels scoffed, but something in her tone made him hesitate. What the hell are you talking about? Cassandra lifted her chin. I am Captain Cassandra Monroe. Silence. The words landed like a blow. Daniels blinked. His head jerked back slightly. McAllister took a slow step away from him. Cassandra saw the exact moment it hit. Daniels' jaw tensed. His grip on his belt tightened. His pride was crumbling right in front of her. And he hated it. I outrank you, she continued. And you have just treated a superior officer like a criminal for absolutely no reason. McAllister's gaze darted between them, his pulse visibly ticking in his jaw. Daniels didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even breathe for a second. Then, his face twisted. Anger, embarrassment, rage. It was all there. And Cassandra realized something. He wasn't going to back down. He was too far in, too deep into his own ego. Daniels took a slow step forward, voice low and venomous. You think that means something to me, he said. And Cassandra knew. This wasn't over. The breaking point. A heavy silence settled over the roadside. The air was thick with tension, the kind that crackled just before a storm. Cassandra kept her gaze locked on Daniels. His face was tight with anger, his jaw flexing as he processed what she had just told him. He had assumed he was in control of this situation, had enjoyed wielding his authority over her. And now he was the one out of his depth. His hands clenched at his sides, fingers twitching near his belt. She could see the conflict in him. Daniels knew he had messed up, but admitting that meant swallowing his pride. And men like him didn't do that. McAllister looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, his shoulders tight. He had realized the truth too late, had let it go too far. And now he was stuck. The wrong word, the wrong move, and this would explode. Cassandra shifted her stance, instinctively protecting her belly. The baby kicked again, as if sensing the danger in the air. I suggest you step away from my vehicle, she said, her voice unwavering, and let me leave. Daniel's eye twitched. Oh, so that's how this works. He sneered. You think you can just pull rank and walk away? Cassandra's stomach churned. He wasn't backing down. It wasn't just racism anymore. It was about power. Daniels had drawn his line in the sand. He would rather double down than admit he had been wrong. And that made him dangerous. Cassandra had been a cop long enough to know that men like Daniels, men who let their pride drive them, were the ones who made the worst decisions when backed into a corner. He had to feel like he was winning, or he'd make sure no one did. "Officer," McAllister finally spoke up. His voice was uncertain, but there was an edge of desperation there. "Maybe we should." Daniels whipped his head toward him. "Shut up." McAllister flinched. Daniels turned back to Cassandra, his glare burning. "You think just because you're a captain, you're untouchable." He took a step closer. "You think I care about your rank?" Cassandra kept her expression calm, though her pulse was hammering in her ears. "I think you care about your career," she said, "and right now you're seconds away from throwing it away." Daniels let out a bitter laugh. "Lady, I don't give a damn about your threats. You're not gonna ruin my career over a traffic stop." Cassandra arched a brow. "A traffic stop," she repeated. "Is that what you think this is?" Daniels' lip curled. "This is you pulling rank to get out of a ticket." The sheer audacity of the statement almost made her laugh. Her pulling rank. She had waited. She had given him every opportunity to do the right thing. She had played by the rules. And yet, he still saw himself as the victim. Cassandra's fingers curled into fists at her sides. "You are detaining a superior officer without cause," she said, voice even. "You have no grounds to search my vehicle, and if you escalate this any further, I will ensure there is a full internal investigation into your actions." Daniel's expression darkened. "And you think they'll take your side?" He spat. Cassandra's stomach dropped. The words were quiet, but they landed like a slap. He didn't say, "Because you were speeding." He didn't say, "Because you resisted." He said it like a promise. Like a warning. Like he knew that, no matter what, people like him always came out on top. Cassandra stared at him, a slow, cold rage burning in her chest. Men like Daniels were why good officers left the force. Men like Daniels were why people didn't trust the police. She inhaled slowly. "Try me." Daniels' nostrils flared. For a second, she thought he was going to do something reckless. Then, a voice crackled through the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch to Unit 237. What's your status?" Daniels didn't move. The radio crackled again. "Unit 237, we show you on a traffic stop. Do you need backup?" Cassandra saw the hesitation in his face. If he responded now, dispatch would log the stop, would document everything, would create a paper trail. Daniels knew that. For a moment, the only sound was the rush of passing cars in the distance. Then, Daniels stepped back. He let out a harsh breath and turned away, lifting the radio to his mouth. 237. "All clear," he said, his voice clipped. Cassandra didn't move, didn't relax. Not yet. Daniels turned back toward her, his lips pressing into a thin, hard line. "You can go," he muttered. Cassandra should have felt relieved. But she didn't. Because Daniels wasn't sorry. He was just choosing to walk away. She knew, deep down, that if she hadn't been who she was, this would have ended differently. And that realization made her stomach turn. She didn't say anything as she turned, her back aching as she lowered herself into the driver's seat. McAllister stepped back, his face still pale. Daniels stood rigid, his shoulders tight with frustration. Cassandra closed her door, gripping the wheel for a moment before putting the car in drive. She pulled away slowly, her eyes flicking up to the rearview mirror. Daniels was still standing there, watching her go. Still furious, still unrepentant, still dangerous, and Cassandra knew. This wasn't the last time she'd see Officer Daniels. The reckoning. Cassandra drove in silence, her grip tight on the wheel. Her breath was steady, but inside, she felt like she was balancing on the edge of a knife. The encounter with Daniels still burned in her mind. She knew what had almost happened back there. She knew what could have happened. And she knew this wasn't over. Her baby kicked again, reminding her of the stakes. It wasn't just about her. She was bringing a life into this world. A world where men like Daniels could abuse their power and walk away without consequences. Not this time. Her police captain badge rested on the passenger seat beside her, a silent reminder of the weight she carried. Cassandra wasn't just another citizen trying to fight an uphill battle. She had power, and she was going to use it. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the sun had started its slow descent, casting the sky in a warm glow. Her husband, Jordan, stood on the porch, phone in hand, his face tight with worry. As soon as Cassandra stepped out of the car, Jordan rushed over. "Cass, what happened?" His voice was laced with concern. "I called you 3 times." She exhaled, rolling her shoulders as the tension finally settled. "Got pulled over." Jordan's eyes immediately darkened. "Who? What happened?" Cassandra shook her head. "Not now. Let's go inside." He helped her into the house, his protective hand on her back. The moment they sat down, Jordan placed both hands on his knees, leaning forward. "Tell me everything." She did. And as she spoke, Jordan's fists clenched. His breathing grew heavier. "Daniels," he muttered under his breath, as if the name itself was poison. Jordan was a defense attorney. He had spent years fighting against the kind of injustice Cassandra had just faced, and he knew exactly how men like Daniels operated. "This isn't the first time he's done this," Cassandra said. "I saw it in his eyes. This is just another day for him." Jordan's jaw tensed. "So, what are you going to do?" Cassandra picked up her phone. "I'm going to put an end to it." The next morning, Cassandra walked into the precinct with purpose. Heads turned as she strode down the hallway, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Some officers nodded respectfully. Others looked away, avoiding her gaze. Because they had already heard. News traveled fast. She pushed open the door to Chief Ramirez's office. He was a stout, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, his silver hair neatly combed back. He looked up from his paperwork, setting down his pen. "Captain Lewis." Cassandra closed the door behind her and took a seat. "Chief," she said, voice steady, "I need to file a formal complaint against Officer Daniels." Ramirez sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I heard about the traffic stop." Cassandra's brow arched. "Already?" "You know how it is," he said. "Word gets around. Then you also know how bad it was." Ramirez pressed his lips together. His fingers tapped the armrest of his chair. "I do," he admitted. Cassandra didn't let up. "This isn't about me pulling rank," she said. "It's about an officer who abuses his authority, who sees a black woman before he sees a person, who escalates instead of de-escalates." Ramirez exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand down his face. "Do you know how many complaints we've gotten about Daniels in the past 3 years?" Cassandra stilled. She knew there had been others. But hearing it confirmed. It made her blood run cold. "Then why is he still on the force?" she asked. Ramirez gave her a tired look. "You know why." Cassandra clenched her jaw. It was the same old story. Not enough evidence. Just following procedure. Lack of witnesses. And of course, internal politics. "Chief," Cassandra said firmly, "we both know what happens if this goes unaddressed. We're looking at a lawsuit, a media scandal, and if Daniels keeps getting away with this, someone is going to get hurt." Ramirez's gaze hardened. "Are you filing a complaint as an officer or as a citizen?" Cassandra met his stare. "As both." Silence stretched between them. "Then," Ramirez nodded, "I'll start the paperwork." But Cassandra wasn't done. "I want a full internal review, every complaint, every report, every traffic stop he's made." Ramirez let out a slow breath. "You're making a lot of enemies with this, Captain." Cassandra leaned forward. "I can live with that." The next few days were a whirlwind. An internal investigation was launched. Officers were pulled in for questioning. Body cam footage was reviewed. And then, the leaks started. A local journalist got hold of the story. Within hours, social media was ablaze. #FireDaniels began trending. News outlets picked up the case. Civil rights organizations weighed in. Protests were being planned. The pressure was building. And Daniels, he was spiraling. Cassandra was at home when the phone rang. It was Ramirez. "You might want to turn on the news," he said. Cassandra grabbed the remote, flipping to the local channel. And there he was, Daniels, standing outside the precinct, giving a public statement. "The accusations against me are completely unfounded," he said, face tight with controlled anger. "This is nothing more than a personal vendetta by someone abusing their power." Cassandra scoffed. Of course, Daniels wasn't taking responsibility. He was playing the victim. A reporter stepped forward. "What about the footage showing you detaining Captain Lewis without cause?" Daniels' eyes darkened. "I was doing my job. Do you regret your actions?" Silence. A muscle ticked in Daniels' jaw. Then he walked away. No apology. No accountability. Just cowardice. Cassandra turned off the TV. Jordan watched her carefully. "So," he said, "what's next?" Cassandra exhaled slowly. "He won't step down willingly." She met her husband's gaze. "So we'll make sure he has no choice." Daniels thought this would blow over. He thought he could ride out the storm. But he underestimated Cassandra Lewis. Because when it came to justice, she never backed down. And she never lost. Justice served. Cassandra sat in her office, her hands folded tightly on her desk. The precinct was unusually quiet today, the calm before the storm. Her phone buzzed. It was Jordan. "Turn on the news. Now." Cassandra grabbed the remote and flipped to the local station. The screen cut to a live press conference in front of the police headquarters. Reporters swarmed the scene, cameras flashing as Chief Ramirez stood at the podium. And next to him, Daniels. His face was tight, his posture stiff. After a thorough internal investigation, the department has determined that Officer Mark Daniels has repeatedly violated protocols, abused his authority, and failed to uphold the values of this institution. Cassandra inhaled sharply. It was happening. Ramirez continued, his voice firm. "As of today, Officer Daniels has been officially terminated from the force." The words echoed like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters scrambled to ask questions. Daniels, still standing there, looked as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. Cassandra's chest tightened, but she wasn't celebrating yet. Not until she saw the full picture. "What about criminal charges?" a reporter asked. Ramirez's jaw tightened. "The district attorney is reviewing the evidence. We will fully cooperate with their office." Daniel's lips parted slightly in shock. Cassandra finally allowed herself to breathe. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was real. Daniels was no longer a cop. And soon, he might not be a free man either. The camera panned to Daniels. The arrogance, the smugness that had been there during his last public statement. Gone. All that remained was a man who had spent his whole life above consequences, until today. A reporter shoved a microphone toward him. "Officer Daniels, do you have a response?" Daniels stared ahead, silent. No defense. No excuses. Just the weight of his actions finally catching up to him. Cassandra clicked off the TV. She sat there for a moment, absorbing it all. Then she smiled. It was done. A week later, Cassandra stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the buttons on her uniform. Her belly had grown even more, and she knew soon she'd have to take her maternity leave. But for now, she had one last thing to do. She walked into the precinct, and immediately, officers turned to look. Not out of pity, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. She had done something that many before her had been too afraid to do. She had fought back, and she had won. As she made her way to her office, a young black officer, Officer Martinez, stepped forward hesitantly. "Captain Lewis." She turned. "I just wanted to say." He swallowed. "Thank you. What you did, it matters. A lot of us needed to see that." Cassandra's throat tightened. She knew what he meant. She nodded. Always stand for what's right. Martinez, even when it's hard. His face lit up with determination. Yes, Mom. She watched him walk away, knowing that Daniel's downfall wasn't just about justice for herself. It was about every officer of color who had been forced to stay silent. Not anymore. Later that evening, Cassandra sat on the couch, her legs curled under her as Jordan massaged her feet. "You did it," he said softly. Cassandra leaned her head back against the cushion. She did, and for the first time in weeks, she felt light. The stress, the anger, the fear, all of it was behind her now. She wasn't just bringing a baby into this world. She was helping create a world where her child wouldn't have to fight the same battles. Her hand rested on her stomach. "I did it for them," she whispered. Jordan placed his hand over hers. "And they're going to be proud of you." Cassandra closed her eyes, feeling the baby kick once more. A new life, a new beginning, and a better future. Because when injustice knocked on her door, she didn't back down. She stood up, and she won.